Many others joining in as usual, so we'll give it a couple of minutes. Hope everybody had a good weekend.
Yep, I did.
I had the good fortune of visiting with one of our successful AEs who bought a business. Casey Gerke bought Shelley Landscaping in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Has had the business actually now a couple of months, but he did engage us for the ACE framework work. And on Friday, we did a leadership workshop with his 6-man leadership team, and it was a very neat event. Team took it very well. Buy-in was very high. Everybody was excited, and one of the most frequent and prevalent aspects of that transition management is inevitably the employees that are holding over have ideas that they never got to champion before. And when you take the seller out of the mix, it's amazing what might get done. And I'm always a little bit cautious to talk about that because I absolutely never mean any disrespect to the sellers, but it's just an entrepreneurial dynamic that I've watched happen time and time again. And in Casey's case, let's see, out of his 6 people on his leadership team, one of them had been with the seller for 32 years. Another had been there about 18, 15, 14, all in that range. So out of the 6-man leadership team, I think only one person had been with the company less than 8 years. So quite stable transition of a group, and very good, very good forecast, I think, for future of what can happen there at that company. So really exciting to get to be a part of that. Let's see who else we have.
I don't think I've seen so many suggestion boxes in the small businesses I've been in.
Yes, that's right. Totally something to go. Goodness, we've got, let me see who else. Alex and Casey, you guys are with us. It looks, both of you here today. That's great. Who else? Dan, David, I haven't seen you in a while. David, good to have you back in with us. Nathan, let's see. Carl, good. We got a great crew. As always, I'd like to open it up. Anybody have anything in particular they'd like to share, or question you might like to throw out to the group before we dive into our topic of the day?
Hey, Doug, this is Dan. Since you're offering, I just had a question that came up in the last couple of days. I'd love probably a quick response, but I'm self-funding my search, and I keep getting responses when I inquire about a business, about my company, and I haven't set up an LLC. Do you guys? I haven't felt compelled to set one up because I'm not setting up like an ownership structure or something like that. But does it make sense to set up an LLC right now as like I'm kicking off, or do people ever wait until they have more clarity on the business they're acquiring? And if so, what's the you recommend?
As a general word, yes, we recommend going ahead and setting up at least a single member LLC. You potentially can convert those later if you need to into a different structure that might make better sense. But we advocate that when there is going to be independent financing involved, whether it's an SBA loan or private equity, because you want a good accounting of the money you're putting in as your own equity stake. And if you blend that with personal funds for too long, it gets too confusing, and in some cases just not even eligible to be counted. So it's best to have that entity structure and literally go the way of getting your entity done, so you've got legal docs you can take to the bank and get a new bank account added and opened up in the name of that business, so you can do your work that way. So Dick or Dana, you want to add to that thought?
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, me too. Because the SBA will want to know, they don't like to loan 100% of anything. So the more that you can show of money you put in, the more money that you can get from them. And the only way, as Doug mentioned, to really account for that is to say, okay, I'll give you the last 6 months worth of statements and you can see where I spent every nickel.
And even if you're somehow self-funding or privately funding the effort, when it does come to tax time and even ultimately your business protection, you don't want your personal stuff mixed up with the business. There's a concept in law that is called piercing the veil. Most people set up LLCs to protect their personal assets from any claims related to the business. And there is a great Chinese wall of protection with doing that. However, if it can be proved that money was fluidly moving between the business and any personal accounts, that is considered piercing the veil and your LLC protection evaporates. So there's a special consideration to be done for having that. And in terms of timing, we just generally say, why not today? Again, sooner rather than later. So did that help, Dan?
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great question, by the way. Any others?
I have a quick one.
Yeah, Laura.
Hi, license holders. So I'm talking to brokers and asking for the SIM and asking for more information, but I don't have a C24 license, and something like a tile company, for example, needs a C24 license, and so they're looking at me going, why are you asking? So how do you align yourself with somebody with a license ahead of time, and then is that the person you'd have to put in place eventually? How does that work?
Well, and thanks for asking that. I did see your question come up, and I thought we might have a chance to touch on that here. I look at the licensing thing at fundamentally two levels. One, the top of the mountain, the level, what we run into when you think of going coast to coast across the U.S., the licensing requirements change based on the jurisdiction. There really are no federal licensing laws about any of these service companies we deal with. There might be some what you would call federal related, but it's not even law. It's more like trade association at a national level that talks about things like this. But learning what might be the statutory requirement in the jurisdiction where you are is the first step that I would research. And what my experience has been, California has their own set of standards for that. Sometimes it's state, sometimes it's county. It might even be city related ordinance. Mm-hmm. The further east we go in the U.S., we get into state, county, and sometimes even local ordinance type statutes that need to be met. But essentially, unfortunately, it's a little bit all over the board related to what you have to know about licensing. And I'll be honest, we at Acquira don't have a guidebook on this because it is so vast and so widely managed, I guess I'll use the word. A quick Google search or a chat GPT might just give you a good starting point on what's really expected. So that's kind of the top layer that I'm looking at. Now we get into the next layer of, okay, if that's true, what do I need? And at that point, whatever that top of the mountain statute told you needed to do, that's where we've got to start getting potentially a little creative, but again, never out of the bounds of the statutory requirement. Sometimes that can be satisfied by a parking of a license. Mm-hmm. There are jurisdictions where we know of people that are willing to kind of hire their license out. Mm-hmm. and let you use their name and number to register for everything. The one twist on your question, honestly, I've not heard yet, but I'm not surprised by it, and that is the broker being a filter for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the sort of the psycho-emotional element that's going on is the broker doesn't want to bother his sellers with people that aren't going to come anywhere close to qualifying, and so
Right.
they're trying to filter it up front. You might try having a rebuttal of, again, doing your research to know what the local statute is, and sort of challenge them with the facts as you've learned them.
Okay.
You know, you can say to the broker, perhaps that doesn't really apply in this jurisdiction. I will be able to hire a license, and that's part of my business plan. I need to do that. But I want you to know I'm a serious investor and I'm ready to do this deal, and I'm confident I can hire the license if I need to. Something along that line.
Okay.
That
Okay.
makes
Yes, thank you. That's helpful. The helpful words that I can put around it to see if I can get in the door. Because I just want to see. I just want to have more information.
absolutely. That was my thought when I read your post there. I thought, yeah, I hope the broker would be a little more open to discussing it rather than just outright rejecting it.
Right.
Dana, did you have something?
Yeah, I had just a quick comment. A lot of times these companies have more than one person in the company, typically at a more senior level, that has the license that you need. And you can always assess whether you can make a deal with that person to, pay them the way you might pay somebody to rent their license, but they're on staff, or adjust their income to reflect their increased value to the company. So, and you also might want to take a look at what's it take to get the license. Some of them, it takes 10 years to get a master electrician license in some jurisdictions, and some places it might take you a year. And if you're renting a license for a year, you could be the one with the license a year from now. That kind of a assessment would be at least worth asking the questions and figuring out if it's appropriate.
Sure. Thank you. That's great.
Mhm.
Yeah, the bottom line is, I'll go back to my top of the mountain scenario. You need to try to educate yourself on what the exact stipulation is in the local jurisdiction there, whether it's county, city, or state. The good news is the general trend is, again, the further we moved west, for the most part, the licensing kind of lifts, and it's dictated at a state level and nothing more.
Okay.
There are some city jurisdictions in the east that require the owner to hold the license, period, point, paragraph, no exceptions.
Okay.
And that can potentially be prohibitive. So.
Okay.
And
I wanted to also just mention, I'm sort of going through something similar. I'm focused in healthcare, home health specifically. And, when it comes to contracting and licensing, well, what I did, I reached out to a lawyer that specializes in home health, and obviously I can do the research, but he's just more focused on that. So that'll help me to figure out what's the best solution, and also helps me to build out my business plan, since that's something I'm working on right now. I'm under LOI, so.
yeah, that's great, David. Thank you.
It's great
Good
advice.
words. Good words. Okay, well, I want to honor the time here and dive into our topic of the day. I affectionately called this "What Can Go Bump" after closing. It was a little bit of a brainstorm that Dana and I worked on a couple of days and thought about. I'm going to share a screen here if I can get this opened up properly. Be sure. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Now-
All right. Well, clearly, when a closing happens, there are many, many things that are going to be in flight. Sometimes they're big things, sometimes they're very little things. But on the one hand, a lot of our in our training modules, we've got items in due diligence checklists and some of the pre-closing checklists that are in the training. We try to, as best we can, address just about everything we've ever heard of or thought about that might impact your transition, particularly in the ACE framework. And I did not want this session to be a hard sales pitch for our ACE transition framework, but there are undeniably some elements of what we do in the ACE program that are applicable, but there are things that you can consider too. And one of the main things I like to think about, and I will encourage you to think about, is to, on one hand, try to make your thinking about these things as direct and simple as possible. I use a 4-part structure of organizing my thoughts. And in groupings, I've got people, process, product or service, and performance. So I used a P-word alliteration to help my own memory jog these ideas and think about these things. And what we'll do today, we'll kind of lean into each one of these areas and talk about some of the most prevalent things that do happen. As I was prepping for today, I kind of asked myself the question, is there a preponderance of occurrence that is bigger than the others? And potentially, I would say yes. I think the people area is always a challenge and a consideration. And Lord knows we've seen a wide variety of impact related to the people that are in the company, starting with the very fundamental question, what's their relationship to the seller? And we have had situations where there were family members that were employees of the business, family of the seller, that agreed to stay on. And we have run the full gamut of really bad idea up to not so bad, pretty good. It worked out very well. And then we've had everything in between. We also have, of course, long-standing relationships with the seller. I mentioned Casey Gerke's Shelley Landscaping Company. There was, when you look at the roster of the employees, and certainly the key employees that are being retained, there's a long standing relationship with the seller. However, the seller had done a really good job in building a culture for that business. And even though if you looked at his needle of what is owner-centric management of the company versus not, he's a little bit to the good side of not so much owner-centric. He let his guys do a lot of things independently, but when the really big decisions had to be made, it was definitely back to him, and nobody got to sneeze without getting his approval. So, you kind of shake your head. But in general, though, what seems to be indicated in that case, the people are going to be fine. They're going to miss the seller. There's a little bit of emotional split there that people are processing in their own way, but they're already seeing the possibilities of what the new buyer is bringing to them and what they're going to talk about and allow them to do. So there's a lot of excitement. Dana, I'm going to stop right there. You want to offer up a couple of your thoughts on the people issue?
I have a lot of thoughts on the people issue. Doug's right that, it's full spectrum. there are situations where the employees, for any number of reasons, are really looking for somebody to come in and give them the reins. And that is if you're up to overseeing that and it fits with what your objectives are and what your goals are, it can work really, really nicely. And you can have a company that can essentially run itself under your oversight, but they are entirely capable of making good decisions and, making a lot more money than what the company made previously. And then you also have other companies that they're not comfortable doing that because they've been beaten for 10 years by the seller, who didn't let them do anything. So there's a very wide spectrum, and it's part of what you need to assess. And you can kind of hear some of those messages as you're talking to the seller, and hopefully talking to some of the key employees before you close. You can kind of get to some of those messages as to what you're actually being told. Doug, you mentioned families, and there can be, father, son, mother, daughter, but there can also be nephews and nieces and cousins and all sorts of, and they won't necessarily disclose all that because they don't think about it. And so you really need to be very direct and courteous, but direct about how you ask that question. Who else, is involved with the family and all of that sort of thing. And you can kind of get a good sense of that. I would say one of the things that we see a lot is that you've got, you're going to go in on day one, you're going to meet, you're going to close, and then the next morning you'll go in and meet the team. The seller will be there to introduce you. You'll go in to meet the team, and you're trying to figure out, you're going to give them 15 minutes on yourself, what your philosophy is, your direction, and then you're going to want to talk with these people one-on-one and kind of get a feel for who they are. And you'll find in many cases that you've got some real gems in there, but they've never been given the reins and they don't have any authority. So those are the folks you really want to look for early on. And you want to try and assess what their capabilities are as quickly as possible. And you'll find that as you look to build a leadership team, you're going to, if you can, pick some of those folks that are there, clearly capable, great attitude, and know where all the skeletons are buried, and they will help you build that company in just incredible ways. And to them, it's like they're released. They are ready to take on more responsibility. They may have been there 5 or 10 years and only been in this one particular role the whole time, but they are ready. And I've seen a couple of general managers come out of that, and one of them was totally unexpected. And he's doing a great job at this point. So those are the kinds of things you can come across that are positive. And one of the lessons, and you will figure this out within the first month or two, you may have one or more very toxic employees. And those are the kind that you want to lose very, very quickly. Whatever the reason is, you need to lose them very quickly, or they will stand the chance of really poisoning a lot of the employees for you. So you want to be really, really careful about that. Give them a chance, but if they don't respond, then you want to make a change. Those are some key things. There are plenty of others, but those are some key things you need to sort of have in the back of your head when you acquire one of these, home services or any other company to be looking for among the employee group.
David, you have a question, sir?
Yeah, just, a quick question. Like, I'm under LOI right now, and the owner gave me access to all the employees do you think it's good to, have a 15-minute meeting with each one of them, or everyone, like, they already know me, and I don't know if this is, an opportunity to sort of start building that relationship with all the employees or not, or just wait until, or just focus on maybe the top 2 key employees and then sort of do that post acquisition.
You raise a great question. One of the things we do advocate in our training is that you try as a potential buyer to do some sort of site visit as early as possible. And the site visit idea is one step away from the one-on-ones with actual employees and staff. Often the sellers are very reserved and they're holding back because they're afraid to announce that the business is being considered for sale. They're afraid of a bailout activity, spawning a floodgate of people leaving. But my personal observation on all of that is its own data point in your due diligence. If the seller has not been able to build a culture of trust and confidence in one another, if the seller really thinks a bunch of people are going to bail as soon as he announces the sale, that tells me they have not done much to build a healthy culture. And it tells me that the seller doesn't think his people have a lot of respect for what's going on at the business, and they're not looking at the business as a business. They're looking more at their relationship with that seller as the opportunity. And that doesn't bode well for your own long-term success. But if the seller, on the other hand, is opening the doors and allowing interaction, then that's an automatic positive in my mind. I would be very encouraged and excited by that. And again, to tell the story, which I don't think Casey would mind me telling, when he started talking with Steve Shelley on the landscape company, at an appropriate date, they started having meetings with the key employees, specifically with the intent of getting to know Casey as the new owner and talking about kind of what the go forward could look like. They even crafted a bit of a retention letter that had a really nice section on expectation and obligation. And so Casey got to state his expectation for what he was hoping to have by retaining the person, and he shared his sense of obligation of loyalty back to the person to say, if you stay with me and join in, here's what I'm wanting to do for you and with the future of this business. So it was a really healthy exchange. And there was that idea of getting somebody to actually sign a retention letter that said, yeah, I'm going to hang with you and I'm good for this. So a lot of confidence to go to the closing table when you have your, top 5 employees already literally signed on pre-closing. So there's a lot of neat things to do with that. And if your seller is opening that door and offering the opportunity, David, by all means, I would say take them up on it and ride that as far as you can ride it to get to know the people and talk about your vision for what you'd like to do.
All right.
By all means. Well, moving on here, if I may, the next 2 areas kind of run hand in hand, and I think it's the box I've got here for product and service, and then concurrently process. Now, here's my general statement on putting these 2 together. Most of these businesses, they know their product and service very well, else there's not much of a business, right? So if the business has the healthy EBITDA that has gotten your attention, likely they've got a product or service. It's easily definable. It's clear. You can make sense of what is happening. What usually is not clear on how it is happening. And that's where the process aspect comes in. In virtually every case that I've had a hand in doing, and not just with the Acquira population, but going all the way back in my banking days, most entrepreneurial founded businesses have not done much to map process. They've got a fuzzy idea in their head. The owner founder has an idea in his head what the steps ought to be. They might have even implemented some of those steps in the way of maybe creating a form or creating a spreadsheet, or I have seen places where they've got a whiteboard in the office where they track customer activity through the stages of the delivery of the service. But usually, for the most part, process is not very formal. It's seldom automated. And if it's call and dispatch oriented, you might see a mountain of sticky notes on somebody's desktop. But that information is not widely shared with others on the team. So you end up creating these accidental key man risk scenarios where Susie, that is your office manager / receptionist, has all the data on who's up in the queue, but nobody else knows how that's organized or how to manage it or what to look at. So there's going to be a huge likely opportunity to look at the process and be sure it's understood. How does an order come in? Who gets it first? Who touches it next? Is there a bidding and a proposal step that needs to be done, or is there a standard price book that applies? In companies like residential plumbing and even residential electrical work, price book is not often a standard. Usually it's, again, it's some numbers in the back of the owner's mind, but looking ahead at formalizing a price book helps protect margin in your business. If you know what your materials cost and you know what you'd like to charge for a job, you can standardize that and try to get the scalable, repeatable aspect underway so that people aren't having to call back to the office and say, hey, I've got such and such size fixture here. I don't remember what we used to charge for that. What do we need to charge them on this job? And it's very often very informal on how that comes together. So being able to take a look, and the way I would approach this is I would want to get a better and deeper understanding of the product or service that's being offered. And maybe there's several primary service lines that are in play. But then you can start asking the question, okay, what's the process to make that happen? If it does start with a customer call, customer dialing the shop and saying, I need one of these, or I need a plumber, I need an electrician, I need somebody to come estimate my roof, whatever your work may be, then you are probably going to want to start keeping notes of the process itself as you learn it and understand who is accountable for each one of those steps. And more importantly, how many times is that order touched before it is successfully fulfilled? Now, when we do our ACE work, I will mention this, we typically always include a process mapping exercise where we literally sit with the leadership team and spend a couple of hours talking about a process start to finish. And again, I have never had a perfectly clean walkthrough of a process without somebody saying, wait a minute, why are we doing that there? Shouldn't we be doing that over here? Maybe we ought to, oh, no, George needs to get it first. Whoa, we need to know. We need to do this differently. And there's a real interesting discussion that ensues. So being able to look at that, and again, in terms of what kind of might go sideways in the early days, if the owner has too much of that process buried in their own mind and no one else in the business really understands a process, and perhaps a critical process like maybe product ordering. If you need to order materials, if the owner was the person doing that and nobody else did it, that's an immediate handover that needs to get learned and understood and documented. So again, Dick or Dana, you want to chime in on these two areas?
Dick?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you said, Doug. And I think that two things I wrote down as you were speaking is that most people hate change. And so if you're bringing a lot of change to them, sometimes that's a real bad thing. And then on the other side, a lot of people like change. They think things have been done incorrectly or wrongly, and they're open to make suggestions and recommendations. So I wouldn't discount anybody's comments that they throw out to you to improve what's going on.
And I've gone through some of these, Doug, that you're describing, where you've got the whole leadership team in the room, and they're looking at what is being described, and they're all talking at once because they all understand it differently. Mm-hmm. and it can be absolutely hilarious. And there's finger pointing about, well, wait a minute, it doesn't happen there and everywhere else. What you realize is that they don't have a process at all. And if it gets to the one I love is the sales funnel. I start it with asking a question. Okay, how do you get your sales? You'd be surprised the answers you get. Well, the customers call. Oh, interesting. Who do they call? That's when it really gets wild, because it could be Joe Dokes in the field who's the lowest technician, or it could be a foreman, or it could be the assistant to the owner, or it could be the owner, or it could be somebody totally different that doesn't even know they have a role. I mean, it could be anybody that gets a phone call. That's not a process. And how you can make that repeatable, and how you can make it sustainable, and how you can make it actually bring business into the company is a real interesting experience when you've got the whole group there. And you will get those, occasionally you'll get those who won't buy in, but more often than not, you'll find somebody that says, we've got to make this work, and it'll become a really positive experience for them. If you can get that positive experience with that team, you got them. And they are going to look for the next process. How do we make sure we've got good quality work out in the field? That's a good one to ask. And you may find that you've got your most expensive employee driving around all over the city, checking on a journeyman who is just learning the job, or an apprentice who is just learning the job. I mean, it's what you can get out of this whole experience is a lot of efficiency, and it's pretty fun to watch. It's fun to conclude. It's fun to conduct, and it's fun to see the buy-in that you can get. You don't always get buy-in, but most of the time you will.
Yeah. And Dana raises a good point about the whole sales funnel process, because I agree totally with what Dana said. A lot of times the sales process is not that formal, but the opportunity that potentially gets lost is that your sales intake can be a great triage for immediate upsell of services. Mm-hmm. And I'll use the landscaping company I just was with as an example. So they get a phone call and somebody says, I saw you guys driving around my neighborhood. Do you by chance repair sprinkler systems? Well, in their case, the answer is yes, we can do that. Tell me your story. So they'll say, well, I've got this one zone that is not getting water, and I got this other area that looks like the head's broken off or whatever. Well, they do have a process in the shop for doing an intake form that looks like an emergency room triage document. It says, well, they started out telling me this, then I learned that, and ... And pretty soon they can be talking about, well, who maintains your yard week by week? Do you need some help with that? And yes, they do that. Oh, okay. Well, would you like a quote from us? We'll send somebody out to look at your yard and we'll give you a custom quote. And oh, you want more than mowing and blowing? Well, we can do the fertilizing and the feeding and the weeding and tree trimming and some other things, tree trimming up to 12 feet and, so on and so on. And next thing you know, they've got somebody on a service contract for $1,200 a month. And it started out as a broken sprinkler head.
Yep.
So, and all that gets accomplished in, a couple of short phone calls. But if you aren't thinking that direction, and if the people doing those calls or receiving those calls aren't trained that way, you potentially have a lot of revenue just, falling off the edge there. But thinking about the product or service that you're actually offering and understanding and learning as quickly as you can the process to get it there will tell you a lot about what you've got in the business and what your upside is really going to look like. But it can also protect you against downside runoff and error that you don't want to let happen. So the last area I want to talk about here is something I just kind of group as performance. Now, this is where I do want to stress the importance of learning and knowing the numbers associated with your business. Most of these businesses, again, I'm generalizing, but most of them aren't necessarily very sophisticated with the way they track their financials. I used to say, and I've kind of gotten away from it, but I'll be honest and transparent with this group. I used to say a lot of these guys, all they worry about, do I have any money in my bank account? I'm good. And proper financial management of a business involves a little bit more than that. And the old joke among bankers is, the customer that said, what do you mean I'm overdrawn? I can't be overdrawn. I still have checks. And I think as a new owner, you probably have done most of this during due diligence. You've gotten a really good sense of the viability or the strength of the bookkeeping and record keeping of the business, and it might already be on a short list of things you want to fix. It is not uncommon that we hear new owners saying, I need to find a bookkeeper. Even if I have to hire it out, from outside the company. The owner's cousin, Jody, is not a very good bookkeeper. And it was so hard getting our due diligence numbers together because the way they kept their records just wasn't that great. They were ultimately provable so that you could green light and approve the purchase of the business. The EBITDA really was the EBITDA that you expected, but the way they got there, again, perhaps going a little bit back to process, the process for capturing bookkeeping entries and posting them, keeping up with them, might need some work. So having that focus on getting the performance numbers you want. I personally, my favorite go-to solution for a lot of these businesses is to be darn sure that you don't just have company profitability information, but you have product line and service line profitability, a breakout of your total. And if at all possible, if you have customer-based transactions, try to see if you can get to customer profitability. And in some businesses like construction and remodeling or larger dollar installations like flooring, siding, painting, any of those kinds of services, you typically do have a bid process to go to the customer that they approve before you come in. So you know the job's going to be 20,000, 30,000, 50,000, 100,000, whatever. If you can set up your bookkeeping to properly allocate expenses against that project, you can create project or customer profitability. And I learned a long time ago in my own banking days, the best way to get company profitability has to do with the sum of the parts. And if you say you want your business to run a 25% margin, well, guess what? Every project you do ought to have a 25% margin. And when you're done, you'll have a 25% margin company. But on the off chance you've got to cut a little here on one project and pick it up there on another project, you better know how you're doing that. And, you know, I'm not going to disagree with that logic, but you can't discount every project to 20% and expect to have a 25% margin company. Everybody with me on that? So if you're going to do a little bit of adjusting, you know, for friends and family or whatever reason you might justify, you better have a way of making that up in the long run if you want to hit your company level targets. Dick, you're kind of our go-to performance guy here. Any additional thoughts on this area?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I got one company that I have hit that right on the nail. What we did is we just increased our looked at all the expenses and profit margins on materials and on the labor, and marked it everything up 25%, and just kind of do that on an ongoing basis every first of the year. Take a look at it and mark up some percentage. But what we do for that, or what they do for the real big job that's going to come in, where they see the customer hesitating a little bit, they'll say, well, if you sign this contract right now today, my owner will approve a 10% reduction in some of the service. So you're giving up maybe 10% on the design or 10% on the lawnmower that you're going to put in there, whatever you're going to do. So you give up 10% on a little piece of it, but you get that contract in today, but you know everything is marked up 25% going into it. And so there's a lot of games that you can play like that where you don't have to juggle that ball and remember who I gave what to and what. But yeah, I agree with Doug 100%. If you don't do those markups and on everything, you'll wind up at the end of the day or the end of the year and you'll have a 10% margin.
Yep. Well, thanks, Dick. Well, for the sake of time, I want to go ahead and hit just a couple of other thoughts. The word has been used already today, but creating buy-in with the team, with customers, and even with suppliers is potentially one of your biggest challenges. You might be able to really lean into the mechanics, which is kind of what we just talked about on that 4-part model there: people, process, product, and performance. But ultimately, you as a new owner are going to have to think about your strategy for creating buy-in. And the typical thing we run into, as this slide indicates, typically a lot of these, there's not a lot of sophistication with the management, and there are some habits that have been created both by the employees and even by the way suppliers are handled, or even ultimately the way customers are handled. And if you come in with some ideas on how to fine tune these things, don't forget the step about trying to get buy-in. Sharing ideas with the right people at the right time is what helps get buy-in. And what I'll say to that is, it's not a matter of you coming in and going, I'm the new owner, here's how we're going to do things starting tomorrow. It is more about learning, listening, and doing a little bit of a slow play on your implementation. In many respects, I like the idea of waiting a minimum of 90 days before you actually make any big change to anything, unless it is critically needed right away, that something different has to happen. To Dana's point, there might be a very toxic employee. It's pretty obvious. Just a little bit of checking on the background story proves that this has been something that's been going on forever. For whatever reason, the seller did not want to deal with it. That would be a good one to act on sooner rather than later, just on general principles alone. If the majority of the team seems to indicate that they agree there's a problem with this person and they don't know why the seller never did anything with them, it's probably a good indicator that they're somebody that needs to go. But the other way to work on buy-in is just to try to boil everything down into smaller, what you might call more bite-sized pieces. Don't try to boil the ocean when you go in. Just, again, listen, learn, connect the dots as best you can, get it verified with everybody that is critical to the delivery of the service that the company is providing. And especially in the cases where you see a clear path toward establishing a leadership team, get those individuals to weigh in with you and share their thoughts and opinions on things. And then you clearly describe your approach on what you would like to do before it becomes some sort of directive to everybody. And really, that can help improve that buy-in. And one by one, the buy-ins done well accumulate to be a great reputation for you as the new owner. People, the team, and ultimately customers and even suppliers start saying, wow, so-and-so really, they're paying attention. They're genuinely interested in the success of this business. One by one, we've made some good decisions. It's going in the right direction. This is all good, and then they'll be coming to you with the whole idea. Their question on their mind is, what's next? And when you've got part of your team coming to you saying, this is great, what's next? You got them. And that's right where you're going to want them to be. I've got a lot of notes here about some leadership and strategy. What does good look like? We talked about forming a leadership team, and part of our framework in ACE is we do talk about defining and living by your mission, vision, and values, having that discussion with your leadership team. And you can certainly start it by bringing your own idea of vision and values, but I would encourage you to see if you can gather them and do this as a collaborative exercise. Give them some opportunity to weigh in on where you want to go with definition of mission, vision, and value. But you as a new owner have to start it. A lot of work can be done on creating key performance indicators. Good people don't mind being held to a fair and equitable system of evaluation. In fact, they like it better if they know where the bar is and they know what they've got to hurdle, and they know they can do it. They'll be happy to live in an environment like that. This is not early term, but longer term, you can design compensation and bonus structures to address the ways to incentivize standards that you want to build. Always keep a forward-looking org chart. On this one, I do take a page out of the Entrepreneur Operating System Bible, the book called Traction. Gino Wickman. Excuse me. Excuse me. Gino Wickman does talk about an org chart that addresses the value you want added to the business. And then some other things here for longer term we can look at. But I think that's about it on the topic we had for today. Anybody have any closing thoughts or questions they'd like to ask?
Yeah, Doug, I'd throw another one in on that, get your buy-in from your mission and your vision, and that is to sit down with your management team too and go through a SWOT analysis. You might be surprised that what they think is maybe a weakness is really a strength, or a strength may be a weakness. But it gets them thinking, what are our strengths, so that you can capitalize on those strengths in the marketplace. So add that to the list of vision and mission, and do the SWOT analysis with your staff too.
Great.
Agreed. Very good. Dana, any last thoughts?
That's a great point, Dick. No, I think there's been a lot covered here, and you don't know what you encounter until you get there. But a lot of these things you'll be reminded of a lot of the things we've talked about today, and hopefully this conversation will be helpful to everyone.
Yeah, so with a couple of minutes we got left, I'll open it up. Anybody else have any closing questions or thoughts they'd like to share? Okay, well, hearing none, I'll say we'll sign off. Appreciate everybody's attendance and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Hey, bye. Thank you.